In some of the reading that I've done, there's discussion of the dark night of the soul. I don't think it's so much as losing faith, but losing that contact and feeling that you're in the desert and that there's nobody listening. Have you experienced that? And
yeah.
How do you... could you tell me what it was like? And how
Terrible.
it
One of the standard things that happens, if you've had quite a nice, sort of experience in prayer, and it seems to be quite a congenial way of spending your time, pretty soon after you enter religious life, that goes, and you're left with darkness, boredom, dryness, deadness, and it seems just like, as somebody once put it, you're sitting there doing nothing or talking to yourself on your knees, as somebody put it. And to have the faith that actually something is happening can be quite difficult. But the Carmelite tradition particularly gears people to that reality and helps one to realise that it's only the externals that are changing. There's something going on very deeply inside. You're less aware of it. There's less to feed your imagination, less to sort of write down in a notebook or anything like that, but much more going on at a much deeper level. You get to a much deeper level of self-knowledge, which is very painful. None of us usually like ourselves very much when we get close to ourselves. So it's a lot of work like that goes on, and perhaps over quite a long period of time.
There were a couple of periods in my life when any sense of that just seemed to be obliterated. And even the sense of God's presence, of God's love, even at one time the very sense of God's existence. At the time, it's not possible to really make sense of what's happening. That's part of the suffering of it. But later on, I was able to see that within the context of John of the Cross's teaching about the dark night, and to understand that it's God's way of progressively leading a person deeper into a truer relationship with him, which involves letting go of all earlier concepts and constructs about God, which are shaped very largely by our life experience, our teaching, the way the faith has been presented to us, but hasn't yet become fully personal. And because as I said, if this way of life is a response to God's invitation to enter into a deeper relationship with him, he certainly wants it to be a real relationship with the real person that I am and the real God that he is. And that dark night is simply God refusing to answer any longer to the sort of image or the picture, the concept that I had of God. And it's difficult to let go of that without anything immediately in its place. So you're in sort of void for a time, grappling. God isn't answering to anything. You've lost what you had, but you haven't yet got anything else in its place. So it's only over time when, well, speaking for myself, slowly I learned to just let go, to submit to what was happening. And gradually came through to a much simpler, but much deeper and more real sense of God in my life, of who God is in my life, and of who I myself am. That I would say I emerged from that experience, and it lasted, I did last a couple of years. I would say I emerged from it with my feet finally on the ground. I knew who I was, and was content to be who I am. And until you come to that point, you can't really give yourself to God until you have possession of yourself, until you know who you really are.
I spent about 18 years grappling with the sense that although I wanted to give God everything I had, it was such an infinitesimally worthless gift to give him, and that God more or less was politely disdaining it. And I had to battle with myself that God isn't like that. God doesn't treat people like that. God keeps his promises as much as I keep mine. But emotionally and effectively, it felt very hard, like trying to knock on the door of somebody whom you admire or revere, and feeling that they're going to just slam the door in your face if they opened it. And it was a long, long, hard time to battle with that.
And what, you've made your promises, what promises do you think God would or should have made to you? That's what we talk about that. What do you mean by that?
To be as faithful in love to me as I was trying to be to him. And during that long period, it seemed as though he just wasn't around, didn't care.
And that's a long time to
It is a long time.
How did you struggle with that from day to day? I mean, that's...
It's not always at sort of white-hot intensity, and there's lots of things to distract you. One of the big temptations is to distract oneself by getting very busy, and I was very busy during those years, just doing the ordinary chores in the house and things like that.
I mean, it could be said that because the house is busy, and because you have a full day of divine service and prayer, that in a sense this is a distraction from that inner work, and that you can complacence is not quite the right word, but you know what I mean, that you can just go through the daily rituals and rhythms of life and pretend to yourself that everything is fine.
Yes.
But you're not doing that. You weren't doing that for 18 years. That's a long, long time to spend in...
I think that's the nature of faith, is to hang on when you're absolutely in the desert and there's just no horizons.
18 years is a long time.
It is.
And not any time during that time did you feel...
No, it was not always that intense. I suppose there were periods of up and down, but that was a basic background. And in the end, it was a retreat that we had, and the priest, I tried to explain to him how bad it was. And he just said very quietly, God isn't like that. God doesn't do that to people. And somehow he sort of unlocked a prison I felt I'd been shut in. And after that, I felt free again, and that all my fears and apprehensions about God's relationship towards me had been just a complete misunderstanding. Well, a complete testing of my faith. And I sort of came out the other side with something more positive.